have some news about consumer sentiment rising in the United States. So the University of Michigan has a preliminary reading on the overall index of consumer sentiment this month, and it came in at 78.8. This is the highest reading since July of 2021. Let's compare this back in December. In December, it was at 69.7. And economists, for them, this came out of nowhere. It seems like economists don't know much, to be honest. I feel like they get surprised so frequently.
Yes, they are wrong about like incoming data so often.
It's so
always.
Yeah, it makes me feel like they don't know anything. But not to shit on you guys too much, whatever. It's just that we could do your jobs better, probably.
Of course. Yeah.
So economists only thought it was going to be 70, but we came in at 78.8, which means consumers are kind of happy with where we're at, and it's coming with this good inflation news. They also asked these consumers what they expected inflation to look like over the next 5 years, and it slipped down to 2.8 and 2.9 over the prior months. So consumers' sentiment is rising because they are expecting inflation to cool even more. And this is all great news from anybody who cares about interest rates and our larger macroeconomic picture. Because these easing inflation expectations, these positive consumer sentiments, this is going to change the Federal Reserve. It's going to change their mindset. So they've indicated that in the second quarter, they're probably going to want to start cutting their rates from where they're at right now, 5.25 to 5.5%. So Fed Governor Christopher Wallace has said that this news, in combination with the positive inflation expectations, that he believes that the Federal Open Market Committee will be able to lower the target range for the federal funds rate this year. Probably second quarter, probably not first quarter. They're going to be more on the conservative side of it, but I already see fighting of economists saying that they should cut now. But I think they're going to lay more on the conservative side and wait a couple months.
Yeah, inflation that we've seen, I feel like is still, I mean, the last inflation report, core inflation was 3.9% year over year.
Yeah, something like that.
3.9. So that's not the 2% mark that they want, right? Yeah. It's definitely a sign that they could still keep rates up, but I do also see these economist sentiments that say if you don't cut sooner rather than later, then you're going to allow a recession to happen.
Yeah, or at least just not as much growth as you could have, right? It's not always so like, oh, if we don't do this, it's all over. It's more just like we could have had a 2.7% GDP growth instead of 2.4. Why'd you fuck it up?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So with the consumer sentiment on the rise, it means that something is breaking through to the American public. For the first time in a long time since Biden took office, it seems like people actually have somewhat of a positive feeling about the economy. This is new for the Biden administration. This has been his toughest issue, was dealing with inflation, dealing with supply chains, And so now I ask the question, are we past the vibe session? And I want to look back to other elections where we've seen spikes in this consumer sentiment.
Okay.
In the 12 months before the 2012 election, the index rebounded from a sharp drop in the summer of 2011, and it led to Obama beating Mitt Romney. We saw a consumer confidence increase. Consumers went into the voting booth confident about their wallet, about who they were voting for president, and they were able to win. This didn't work so well for George Bush the First. George Bush the First lost his re-election campaign, and he had a higher spike in consumer sentiment similar to Obama. But Ross Perot also ran in that election and caused a whole mess. So I don't know if that's a good example. But point is, it seems like Americans are finally feeling the high GDP growth. They're feeling the inflation coming down.
Yes.
And that's going to spell a lot of good news for Biden, especially if we can get a rate cut in quarter two.
Yeah.
You might start feeling that in the beginning of quarter four.
Yeah, my take is largely this is media driven. Mm-hmm. I see it on my Twitter all the time. I'm sure you see it, right? Like kind of liberals fighting to get the message across that this is a good economy. But I'm also sure that in more mainstream outlets, it's becoming harder. I feel like they're probably just not talking about the economy in right-wing outlets as much, and left-wing outlets are talking about how good the economy actually is.
Yeah.
Because that's where the evidence is right now.
Right.
So
you go.
I just think the media environment is kind of lifting this up. And I would also point to this chart that we have on our notes page right now. And what we see in the chart is when Trump took office, first of all, when Trump was elected, just about that moment, Republican consumer sentiment crisscrossed with Democratic consumer sentiment. Democrat sentiment went down, Republican sentiment went up. For Trump's entire presidency, Republican consumer sentiment stayed sky high, while Democratic sentiment was much lower. You go further, you get to Biden taking office. Again, right when Biden is elected, they crisscross. Democratic sentiment goes above Republican. And it has stayed there since, throughout the whole way. So to me, that shows, because the economy obviously isn't changing that drastically in those periods. So what is changing drastically is just the framing of the media about the economy with regards to the president, because it's the best weapon they have against the president.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
I just think it's the same thing happening now.
Yeah, it's a whole media bubble, right?
Yeah.
And so now, and I call it a vibe session, because when people were getting asked, like, how do you rate the economy? Oh, it's terrible. God, Joe Biden's economy sucks. And then they're like, okay, how are your finances? My finances are pretty good. It's like I'm either getting ahead or I'm doing better.
Yeah.
Or I'm doing okay. Or I'm holding steady.
Yeah.
And so, like, hold on. It's almost like that thing where the world is burning everywhere around me except my house.
Yeah, which
Right.
means it's actually not burning everywhere.
Right, because if
around
everyone
you.
feels that way, it's burning nowhere.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what was happening over the last year.
Yeah.
Not to say that the year when we had the inflation at 8% was okay for everybody, not saying that. But over the last couple months, when we've had wage growth outpace inflation, when we've had prices come down and core inflation come down, it's just a good economy.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we're at this point where people. So we're in election season. People are examining Biden's approval rating and how well he's doing, and in doing that, they're asking the question: okay, like New York Times, all these other outlets, they're asking the question: if the economy is doing so well, why do people dislike Biden so much? And I feel like that kind of idea has trickled down into people saying, oh wait, the economy is doing so well, and so there's this reason to look at the economy in the political context that we're in. And I think that's just going to keep ramping up as the election gets closer and closer. Then we see a rate cut coming eventually. The stock market is probably going to keep rising in with that rate cut.
Yeah, I mean, we have the S&P and Dow Jones hitting record highs.
Exactly. So I think as far as people who are willing to actually give Biden any credit for a good economy, he looks great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, anybody who was going to be on the fence,
Yeah.
who could possibly give Biden a good rating on the economy, will now give him that rating.
Yeah, I don't know how you could. I mean, there are obviously still problems. There are housing prices that are.
There's healthcare costs going through the roof in a lot of cases. Even
Yes.
though Biden administration has made good strides on that, he hasn't done enough.
Exactly.
The housing crisis.
Yeah, so there are still things to point out. And to those people, we just have to think about, is the alternative better?
Right.
And that's a whole discussion to have. But as far as these macro indicators, he's doing great.
Yeah.